I mean, I think my mom has a story that is very like archetypal of so many Americans today. Like we're seeing in our kids, ourselves, our parents, which is kind of getting on that chronic disease treadmill, racking up the American typical diagnoses and, getting the pills for every ill, but never actually getting better. And so I'll share my mom's story briefly, which is that like, I would say her sort of health journey started in her 40s. She had me when she was about 40. She'd had, like a 20-year career and was a fast-paced New Yorker, and then had me at 40.
So, Casey, I am super pumped to have you on and have this conversation. Stanford grad, doc, hits eject, and is on a journey to change the world in amazing ways. Why? I mean, you're killing it in the world that you are in, surgeon, all of it, and then you said, there's more, there's a problem, and I want to be a part of fixing it. Tell me about that.
You nailed it. I mean, I think it was waking up. It was looking around me and kind of popping up from the day-to-day bustle that keeps us so distracted. We're all in this like busyness industrial complex doing our work. And I think it was really just taking a moment to kind of look up and pop up and look around me and realize that like, even though I'm a doctor working 80 hours a week as a surgeon, like the health of Americans is actually, it's terrible, and it's getting worse every single year. Like literally the more we spend on healthcare, the sicker we're getting. And when you're a doctor in that system, working day in and day out, but really the outcomes are actually very, very, very bad and getting worse. I mean, like life expectancy is going down in the United States, despite spending more than any other country in the history of the world. And so something's not right. And I'm just, by nature, the kind of person who asks why, which I think is at this point one of the most dangerous questions you can ask in the modern world is like, why? And when you start to ask why about the American healthcare crisis that we're in, with 6 in 10 Americans with a chronic illness, 50% of Americans with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, 75% of Americans overweight or obese. When you start asking why, what it leads you to directly is the fact that there is a root cause issue underlying almost every chronic disease and symptom we're facing in the United States, and that's metabolic dysfunction. And that's a really foundational, fundamental problem with how our bodies are working. And it's caused by the confluence of factors of our modern diet and lifestyles in the United States that are all hitting metabolism square head on. And so the majority of us have metabolic dysfunction in the US, and it's literally either the cause or the accelerant of every leading cause of death that's killing Americans today. So once I kind of put those pieces together, I really did have to press eject and say, I got to focus my career. I've got 40 more years of career ahead of me. I mean, there is some benefit to going in there every day and busting holes in sinuses and sucking pus out. I was a head and neck surgeon, but there's a bigger fish to fry here, a bigger fish that is, I believe, totally solvable. And it is the biggest blind spot in healthcare, because we don't focus in the Western healthcare system on a root cause approach. We focus on whack-a-mole, silo, reactive medicine. And so I left, this was about 6 years ago, and I devoted my life to really that root cause of why people are sick and how we can empower people to get on top of those modifiable factors to really reach vibrant health. And that means understanding and improving your metabolic health.
And Casey, you dedicated the book, I believe, to your mom, correct? Who passed from pancreatic cancer, which you said is something that could have been avoided. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I did dedicate this book to my mother, and I think that she was my best friend, and we were so tight. And she did die of pancreatic cancer, which in many ways, pancreatic cancer is a preventable disease if you are really focusing on the modifiable risk factors. And my mom, I think the reason I share her story through my book is because I think she's actually quite archetypal of what so many Americans are dealing with today, especially with the health of the aging population, which is that we start in our midlife, start racking up these sort of typical American diagnoses that so many people have: the high blood pressure, the high cholesterol, the blood sugar is rising, we're anxious, and then all of a sudden something really catastrophic happens. And, it kind of feels like it's out of the blue. But a real question I have for people is like, if we saw a lot of these conditions that we're facing as Americans as connected, really understood the physiology of how these are really have some shared physiology, these really scary diagnoses at the end of life, we'd realize they were sort of the end of the spectrum of something that's quite actually related, as opposed to these, unlucky things that just pop out of the blue. In many ways, a lot of the symptoms and issues we're dealing with earlier in life are actually clear warning signs, but we miss that because of the framework that our healthcare system has, which is very isolated and siloed and highly specialized. We have over 42 medical subspecialties in our country, and yet our health is getting worse. Literally, the more specialties we invent in healthcare, the sicker we're getting as Americans. So how do we actually see the connected root cause? So for my mom, she had me at 40. I was a really big baby. I was almost 12 pounds. She had a ton of trouble losing baby weight. So she, kind of after babies went from that normal weight to more that overweight, obese category, like so many Americans, 74% of Americans now. She had that resistance to weight loss. Then she had a really tough menopause. Then she in her, 50s started getting the high blood pressure, the high cholesterol, the high blood sugar. She went to each specialist, the endocrinologist, the cardiologist. They said, here's a statin, here's an ACE inhibitor, here's metformin, super common. Yep. Next thing you know, she's, 72, and she's taking a hike with my dad, and she gets this belly pain, and she goes to her PCP because it lasts her a couple days, and they order a CT scan, and she has widely metastatic pancreatic cancer, and she died 13 days later. And at that time, she was
Holy smokes.
Oh, yeah. And I mean,
13 days?
13 days later, yeah. Pancreatic cancer often prevents.
No, I know it's so deadly, but that's quick.
Yeah, and it's so funny because the doctors she was seeing are what many would call like the best in the world. She was seeing doctors at Palo Alto Medical Foundation, which is attached to Stanford, and she was getting executive physicals at Mayo Clinic. And her oncologist looked at my brother and I and my dad and said, I am so sorry. This is so unlucky. And I think in some ways she really believed that because of the way that we're trained in our system to see everything as separate, but through a more root cause lens. And what the research is actually telling us today is that you look at having a big baby, which is a condition that's literally called fetal macrosomia, which is very tied to metabolic issues. Then you look at the resistance to weight loss, which is fundamentally rooted in insulin resistance. You look at the high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugar, which are literally comprise like the definition of metabolic syndrome, and then cancer, which we're now realizing is very much a metabolic driven disease, high insulin levels, hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance. This literally is an anabolic hormone that drives growth of cancers. And so what I'm really asking people to think about and understand is that we're in a system that profits off us seeing the body as all these fragmented, siloed parts. That gets us into the office of dozens of different specialists throughout our lifetime. But there's a different way we could be looking at the body if we put these root cause goggles on, these metabolic goggles. And what we'd find if we did that as individuals in a system is that if we really focus on the right issue, turn our attention, our lifestyle and dietary habits, our $4.3 trillion healthcare costs in the United States towards the real issue, we would all get better very, very, very quickly. So that's the call to action in this book, is to reorient to reimagine the healthcare system through this connected root cause lens rather than the fragmented reactive lens that we're practicing in now, that's blinding us to just obvious trends happening in our country that are decimating our human capital, and that we could be easily preventing and reversing if we popped up a little bit and really looked at what's happening.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, seeing 20 different types of docs you talk about, right?
Yeah.
People that people are seeing. So when you think about the preventative angle, and so what would you tell somebody to go do right now who's wanting to try to go, oh, wow, I didn't know I had a big baby. I didn't know that was a risk. Or what are the other things that we should be paying attention to as we rewind the tape that could help us see what we could potentially be proactive about preventing in our own lives?
Yeah. Well, when you look at sort of the spectrum of diseases that have some relationship to metabolism, to metabolic dysfunction, and there's a lot of kind of synonyms for this word. So I'd say that words people have heard about, like insulin resistance or blood sugar problems or metabolic dysfunction. They're all kind of referring to the same thing, which is an issue with fundamentally how our bodies and our cells power themselves, how our mitochondria produce cellular energy to power our bodies. So when you look at essentially based on the research literature, which diseases are associated with that, it's kind of a whole spectrum from kind of these mild pain points that are plaguing a lot of Americans all the way to like the serious life-threatening stuff. So just to give some examples, like infertility, which is going up like 1% a year in the United States. The leading cause of infertility in the United States is polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is deeply rooted in metabolic dysfunction and high insulin levels. Even the sperm count declines, which some estimates say that our sperm counts have declined 50% in the last 50 years. This is also related to metabolic dysfunction because men who have abdominal obesity, that fat around their midline is literally converting their testosterone to estrogen and impairing spermatogenesis. Depression, anxiety, fibromyalgia, migraine, gout, fatty liver disease, many autoimmune conditions, all of these have their fingers interlaced with metabolic issues. Then you go to more of the like immediately life-threatening things. We're talking about stroke, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, type 2 diabetes. I mentioned heart disease, heart attacks. These things are all very much related. And of course, risk for dying from infectious diseases like COVID or influenza, the risks are so much higher if you have underlying metabolic issues. And so what I would say, which is a bold statement, is that if there's anyone out there listening who has almost any symptom that is chronic and that they can't figure out, one place to definitely examine is to just understand where you're at in terms of metabolic health. Because if that is in some way, not optimal, that's a place that's readily modifiable and that could have a positive impact. And so step one would be knowing where you stand. It would be doing
and maybe Casey, I certainly didn't go to Stanford, and I'm sure some of these folks listening aren't as smart. I'm certainly not as bright as you. Tell me about, can you define metabolic and mitochondria just for folks that, okay, that'd be amazing.
Totally. It's so much simpler than I think even in high school biology we were kind of led to believe. So basically, metabolism is how we convert food energy to cellular energy. So we take in 2 to 3 pounds of food a day, about a metric ton of food a year, 70 metric tons of food in a lifetime. And that food is essentially potential energy that we can convert to cellular energy. Because when you think about like, what is our life? Our life is essentially the bubbling up of trillions upon trillions of chemical reactions happening in our trillions of cells every second. We have about 40 trillion cells. They're each doing trillions of chemical reactions. All of those require energy to happen. That energy is produced through metabolism. And the machine that does that is a part of our cell called the mitochondria, which you probably remember from high school biology is like the powerhouse of the cell. The unique thing about our modern world right now, and really the industrialization of all aspects of our diet and lifestyle over the past 50 to 75 years, really since the Industrial Revolution, but it's accelerated a lot more recently, is that everything, our industrialized diet, our less sleep, less movement, chronic low-grade stress, environmental toxins, our relationship with artificial light, everything is synergistically hurting the mitochondria. So this is a unique feature of modernity that is just so fascinating because it's all happening at once to basically screw up this key part of the cell. So if you have cells that don't have enough power to do their work, like a liver cell needs to do its work as a liver cell and a brain cell needs to do its work as a brain cell, what will happen with underpowering metabolic dysfunction is that you will have dysfunction of that cell. There will be some issue with how it works and how it does its job. And really all that symptoms are and diseases are dysfunction of groups of cells. And there's many things that can cause dysfunction in cells. But a big one that we know is affecting the vast majority of Americans is this metabolic issue. Because the recent research from the American College of Cardiology suggests that 93% of American adults are dealing with this metabolic issue. So we're talking about underpowering, essentially. A dimming of the ability to do the work. And the cool thing about the body is that we have over like 200 cell types in the body, like the liver cells, the ovarian cells, the brain cells, the lining of blood vessel cells, retinal cells, et cetera, et cetera. There's over 200. So underpowering, like a core fundamental issue in this foundational process showing up in different types of cells will look like different symptoms. Underpowering in a brain cell looks different than underpowering in a liver cell, because dysfunction in a liver cell looks different than dysfunction in a brain cell. The way that we categorize diseases in our Western system is by their symptoms, how they look, not based on their physiology, what's happening invisibly in the cell. And that's the core issue. So that's kind of the primer on like Metabolism 101 and why it can look like so many different branches of what is fundamentally the same tree. And the rough truth is that the system isn't practicing this way. And so it's not going to help you as an individual kind of figure this out, which is why this is why I wrote a book. This is why it's important to talk about it on podcasts, because people do need to actually kind of be the CEO of their metabolic health and understand where they stand and then how to improve it, because it's going to be a little while, I think, before the system starts practicing this way. Everything is slower. As you know, there's stats that say that it takes 17 years before research literature makes it into clinical practice. And I think we're kind of in that in between right now. So circling all the way back, I think one of the key empowering things we can do is actually just understand a few of our basic metabolic biomarkers to get a sense of like where we're at. So happy to run through those if
I would let's dig in. I love it. I mean, I think let's go.
Yeah. So the very basic tests that can give you a sense, like a directional sense where you are on the metabolic spectrum, are the 5 that define metabolic syndrome. So it's fasting glucose, triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, waist circumference, and blood pressure. And all of these in some way are telling you about that metabolic process that I was talking about, that food to energy conversion in the mitochondria. So based on the research, to basically be considered optimally metabolically healthy, which is now a very, very small percentage of the United States, it means that you have a fasting glucose less than 100, a triglyceride less than 150, an HDL cholesterol above 40 in men or above 50 in women, a waist circumference less than 35 in women and less than 40 in men, and a blood pressure less than 120/80. And that's not on any medication. So not on a blood pressure medication, not on a blood sugar medication. That's just no medication, and you are in range on all of those that I just mentioned. And that puts you in a single digit percentage of American adults right now. And that number could be close to 100%, because these are very, very much determined by what we're eating and how we're living every day. So step 1 is just pulling your lab results and your getting a tape measure out and kind of figuring that out. And if you have an annual physical coming up, just making sure your doctor is ordering those tests. And the nice thing about these tests is they're often free on a physical. There's nothing fancy here. It's just basic tests, and your doctor's not going to fight with you about it. So that's good news. From there, there's a lot more tests that you can ask for that can give you kind of more of a rich picture of metabolic health. So one of my favorite tests is called fasting insulin, which is essentially testing the hormone that helps your body take sugar out of the blood into the cells. Insulin is the hormone that's released from the pancreas after we eat sugars and carbohydrates, and brings the blood sugar out of the blood into the cells for processing. And we know that when insulin levels rise in the blood, it's a sign that the body's having trouble processing that glucose to cellular energy. So it's going to block it from coming into the cell, and insulin levels are going to rise. So that's a really valuable test. And sometimes doctors will push back about ordering it because they'll have, a young, maybe trim person in front of them and say, oh, you don't need this test. But the reality is we really all need to know since the numbers are so high. So fasting insulin, I love liver function tests, which are actually also very easy to order and cheap, like AST and ALT, because when we start developing metabolic issues, the liver is really like a key metabolic organ, and metabolic issues will damage liver cells, and then they'll leak out these enzymes, AST and ALT, from the liver, and they'll rise in the blood. So we want to keep those liver function tests down, and those can often be improved rapidly when people get off the processed sugar, get off the processed grains, stop alcohol. Liver function can really improve, and that's a great sign of improving metabolic health. I also love a test called HSCRP, which is high sensitivity C-reactive protein. This is like a key inflammatory marker in the body. And this one's really important because when we have metabolic dysfunction and our bodies aren't powered as well as they could be, that's a profound threat signal in the body. That's going to mobilize the immune system, and we're going to see those inflammatory markers go up, because like what could be scarier to a body than not having the power to do its work? So that is a real pro-inflammatory signal. So for fasting insulin, ideal ranges, we want them between about 2 and 6, certainly less than 10. For AST and ALT, optimal range seems to be below about 17. And then for CRP, we want that definitely less than 1, ideally less than about 0.35. And there's several others that I talk about in the book, but right there, those 8 or 9 biomarkers that I mentioned, like, will give you a good clue. I'd also throw in hemoglobin A1C, which is a 3-month average of your blood sugar levels, and that's one that we want to be below about 5.5. The standard ranges says below 5.7 is normal, but really between 5 and 5.5 is ideal. So those are some basic ones that can give you a good sense of where you are. And if they're out of range, it would be a great idea to start really thinking about how to improve metabolism with diet and lifestyle.
Well, I mean, Casey, what I think is so cool, I have a guy who's been sort of my health and fitness coach since I was a student athlete at Michigan State, and Chris Johnson, and he's been a guy that I lean into for lots of stuff. And what I think is so important is he was the first guy to say, hey, here's the list. Take this into your doc and get all this blood work done. And I think so often we think we've got to go do all these crazy. It's not that hard. Like, you can walk into if you're a woman, your OB doc, your general doc, and say, I want all these pulled. And they're not going to charge you out the yin yang. They'll run the extra tests, right? And then you can get, to your point, this data and begin to have, because the blood work is the most, at some level, fact-based, authentic view of what's happening at your cellular your level, correct?
Totally. I mean, I think the lab work is so important because there is so much noise in the health space right now. And you've got the CDC saying one thing. You've got health influencers yelling at each other on social media. You've got all this different info. You know, I got to be vegan. I got to be carnivore. I got to go paleo. I got to be Mediterranean diet. I got to be, you know, it's wild. And the vast majority of Americans are totally confused about nutrition and what to do. And that creates decision paralysis. So this is why I always say, I'm like, don't trust, and this is a scary thing. It sounds scary, but it in the end, I think it will make sense. But I'm like, don't trust doctors. Don't trust influencers. Don't trust the science. Definitely don't trust me. Like, trust yourself. Trust your biomarkers, because the biomarkers don't lie. Like, you can certainly try what your doctor says. Certainly try what a health leader that that you feel aligned with their view says, and commit to it. But test your biomarkers. Test the biomarkers that matter, that are predictive of whether you are currently sick or are going to be sick in the future. And if they are not improving, then it is not the right strategy for you, right? Like, it takes away a lot of the emotion. It takes away a lot of the blind faith. And, you know, ultimately, if our biomarkers are getting worse on a strategy that we're on, or not getting better, then we should probably change the strategy. And we need to be really, really honest. Yeah. No, I love it. So you talk about 6 principles of good energy eating. And, you know, I love what you talk about. I mean, it's all about getting your food from the source, the way it came into the world, right? I'm a big, fan of all of that. But you talk about these 6 principles, and so I'd love for you to just tee these up, Casey, for folks, and sort of at some level, how they can then think about them in a way that they can deploy in their daily lives, right? So you talk about food determines the structure of our cells and microbiome. Yeah. So in the book, one thing I really wanted to do was help people unattach from the dogmatic nutrition ideologies that I think are really stressing people out, and just think about, let's take first principles, like, what is food and how do we fundamentally win at this matching problem that is ultimately what health is. Health is matching the needs of your cells with what you're exposing the cells to. And when you match the needs of these machines with the inputs, like, you will get health. And when you do not overburden them with things that they don't need or they're going to overwhelm the system. So food is one of our primary levers there of meeting the needs of the cell. So this first principle is, it determines the structure and function of our bodies and our microbiome. So why is this important? Again, we eat 70 metric tons of food in a lifetime. And that is the molecular, physical building block, the bricks that are literally building our structure. And I think one false notion I think we kind of have about our bodies is it's this thing that's kind of a static thing. The reality is our bodies are turning over constantly, and we're constantly 3D printing tomorrow's version of our body. We turn over our entire gut lining every 2 to 4 weeks, our entire skin every 50, 60 days. It's incredible. And the way that we re-3D print the body is by what we're putting in our mouth. So we want to make sure that it is the highest quality, nutrient-filled food. And unfortunately, that's the opposite of what our food is right now. 60 to 70% of the food on our shelves right now is ultra-processed, nutrient-depleted frankenfood that not only is stripped of its nutrition to build our bodies, it's coming from soil that has been decimated in the United States by industrial agriculture. So we've got depleted whole food that can then get stripped further in processing, and then that is what we're putting into our bodies to 3D print ourselves. It's not going to go well. It's not going well. So that's number one, is really something to conceptualize. And then in terms of the function, so aside from all that information, that molecular information from food, building our bodies, it's also the instructions for how our cell signaling pathways are going to work and how our genes are going to be expressed. Yeah. And literally the molecules and the compounds in our food can bind to our DNA, can bind to our cell membrane receptors, and totally change function. So you can be using food as essentially this tool to turn up helpful things and turn down unhelpful things. But that's not how we're taught to eat. We're taught to eat by dogma. It's almost religious how we eat. And we're not thinking about how to use food as a tool to actually create the outcomes that we want. When I'm eating pumpkin seeds, I'm like, okay, they're full of magnesium, and that's going to be a neurologically calming substance for me. Pistachios, they're going to secrete melatonin in my body, and that's going to help me with, restfulness. Dark cherries, these are going to help with managing uric acid in my body. Cruciferous vegetables, this is going to turn up my antioxidant defense genes. Curcumin from curry and turmeric, this is going to turn down my NF-kappa B inflammatory genes. So having a basic knowledge of how to use food as a tool, this is just literally principle number one. On top of for your cells, you're also doing it for your microbiome cells, which of course are, we have 40 trillion-ish human cells. We've got 100 trillion bacterial cells. And those bacterial cells, we really need to be thinking about them as this is the pharmacy that's living inside of us. They are there to produce neurotransmitters that make us feel good and short-chain fatty acids that tell our mitochondria to work harder and build a fast metabolism for us. But they have to be fed the right food to synthesize the medicines that are going to make us have a healthier life. So, 6 principles like that in the book, that's just number one, which is really having a different framework for food that helps us see what it is on its true nature. It's not for calories. It's not for it's obviously for pleasure in some sense, but it is truly eating as an alchemical process of taking the environment, taking the cosmos, the external world, and incorporating it into ourselves to build the life we want. And if we understand some very, very basic principles about food, we can use it as that tool to kind of get the outcomes that we really want.
Well, and my buddy was telling me, keeping also our cells, the exterior lining of our cells soft enough to take in what we need is I think something that I was sort of like an aha moment of, wow, yeah. You can't just take it in, but you got to make sure your cells are soft enough to absorb it.
That's right.
So what are some of the,
go
and
ahead.
by eating and consuming the right fuel at some level, which is food,
Yeah.
to it supports that, I would imagine, at some level, doesn't it, Casey?
Absolutely. And I think it gets to what you're talking about, gets to another good point, which is just like nutrient absorption. Like how are we actually getting them? We might be taking it in our mouths, but are we getting it into our bodies? Right. And so many of the medications that we take, like candy in our country, like antacids and allergy medications and several antibiotics and even like painkillers and NSAIDs like Advil, a lot of these significantly impact our absorption of these nutrients that are so important. So you've got issues with absorption. And then on the flip side, we have this other issue, which is essentially over-absorption of bad things. And this is this concept that you hear about called like leaky gut or intestinal permeability, where our gut lining has become so damaged by our ultra-processed food that we're eating and our overuse of antibiotics. People will be on 3 months of antibiotics now for acne, not realizing that it's actually destroying the microbiome and the gut lining. So we have this issue where we're not taking it because of certain medications we're taking. We're actually not getting some of the key nutrients we need. And by overuse of other medications and also just the way we're living with ultra-processed food, we're taking in too many damaging things from the gut because it's a leaky and tattered lining, and that can lead to problems. So, all of this leads to, I think, what the punchline in the book is, which is like, what should we eat then? Okay, this sounds, I get it, food is important, but what should we eat? And in really reviewing hordes and hordes of literature, there were 5 specific elements of food that I think are really important to try to get into hopefully all of our meals, at least get these every day. And if we focus on them, we are going to get in a really good amount of positive molecular information to support our cells. So the 5 components I talk about in the Good Energy Eating Plan are making sure we have antioxidant sources, fiber sources, a probiotic source, healthy protein, and omega-3 fats. And really it becomes so simple because if you have a few items in each of those categories that you love, so for instance, for me in fiber, it's like I love chia seeds, I love basil seeds, hemp seeds, raspberries, avocado, and lentils. Like those are all incredible fiber sources. I make sure I have those in my pantry and my freezer. And for omega-3, it's like I love wild-caught salmon, sardines, mackerel, chia seeds, hemp seeds. So I've got wild-caught fish in my pantry if I ever want a little tuna salad during the day. I've got the seeds to sprinkle on my salads. Healthy protein, I've got a freezer full of wild-caught or grass-fed meats like elk and bison for tons of protein. So you just kind of look at all the lists, which are on my blog, they're in my book, they're easy to access, and just fill your kitchen with sources of each of these 5 components. And then eating becomes a bit more like modularized and sort of mix and match, but you can be confident that you're getting these categories of food in that will meet our cells' needs if we really focus on something from each of those pillars. And I like to talk more about what to put in rather than what to take out, because if we're loading it with good stuff, we're barely going to even have the time and space to eat the bad stuff.
I love that.
But the 3 things that I think are really great to just commit today to kind of eliminating from the diet, unless in maybe very rare circumstances, is ultra-processed refined grains, ultra-processed refined sugars, and ultra-processed refined industrial seed oils. Foods that aren't really giving any benefit to our cells' health and that just chip away at the value of that 70 metric tons of food that we have the opportunity to eat in our lifetime, and that are really causing a lot of harm to our bodies the way that they're being used and concentrated in our modern world. So focus on those 5, try to read labels and eliminate those 3. And I think that will get people a lot of the way there. And the beauty is that because there's animal and plant-based sources of all those 5 things that I talked about, fiber, omega-3s, antioxidants, it doesn't really matter what sort of type of diet you want to subscribe to, whether it's vegan or keto or whatever, because you can still get that molecular information from sources that fit, whatever dietary strategy you're focused on.
Well, and I think too, I mean, just thinking, and Casey, I mean, it feels like anytime you pick something up and you're at the grocery store or wherever, if it's got more than 5 ingredients, put it back. Because it's probably got, I mean, it doesn't need to have more than 5, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the best things we can do is all become just really devoted label readers, because if you are looking at a label and basically just commit to buying things where you know every ingredient, and ideally all the ingredients are organic and recognizable and there's no words that, you know, are things
Right,
that
you
came
can't
from
say.
a factory. Yeah.
Totally.
You're going to be so much better off. Like you don't know what a natural flavor or an artificial flavor looks like, so don't eat it. You know, maltodextrin, I don't know what, I can't visualize that. I'm not going to put it in my body. Red 40,
Right.
I don't know what the hell that is. I don't want it in my
Right.
body, you know? And so
Totally.
there are packaged foods that are very much in alignment with my good energy principles. Like, I mean, just now before we were jumping on here, I was having some flax crackers, which are made by flackers.
I love
so they're,
those. Yep.
love them. They're made in a factory.
They're awesome.
But they have 3 ingredients. It's flax
Yep.
seeds, apple cider
Yep.
vinegar, and sea salt. And they're all
Yep.
organic. And so it's certainly not about cooking every single bite from scratch, but it's really about looking at food as molecular information and just making sure you're putting information that you know, recognize, and that you know is good into your body. And when you do that, what it does, circling back to metabolism, is it essentially builds the capacity of the cells and the mitochondria to do that work that we're talking about, to process glucose and fatty acids into cellular energy, to have the resources they need to do all those chemical reactions. And when we have these functioning cells that are built strong, have the right instructions, a lot of our health issues will melt away. Like this is what happens this is what's happening on that invisible level when you hear people turning their health around when they eat more of a natural diet. It really comes down to biochemistry that I think everyone can understand, and that everyone should understand, because this is what we're made of.
Yeah, I mean, I one of the things that struck me, Casey, that you shared on another podcast I was listening to with you is, and this is staggering to me as somebody who, I am not obviously a doctor, but what's staggering is that food is the source for our body's energy. Period. Dot. It is what we put in, and it's the fuel for us. But in med school, you guys, I mean, you shared this, that docs don't learn, or students going through med school do not learn about nutrition. That is insane.
No. I mean, 80% of our $4.3 trillion healthcare costs are going towards chronic lifestyle diseases that are primarily rooted in poor diet. And we have not a single class dedicated to nutrition in medical school. 4 years of medical school. And it's just astounding.
Insane.
But when you unfortunately step back and look at the hard economic realities of healthcare, there's really no incentive for doctors to learn nutrition, because, I mean, and again, this is scary, but I think it's important for people to realize the system that we're operating in, which is that healthcare is a business. Healthcare is the largest and fastest growing business in the United States. In the largest economy in the world, it's the largest and fastest growing industry. And that industry is designed to grow. And the only way that in this current business model that we have, the only way it can grow is if we have more patients having more things done to them for longer periods of time, which is why chronic disease is so profitable. And even though every single doctor I know went into medicine with the noblest of intentions to help people and are working their butts off day in and day out, what people don't realize, even doctors, is that at every level of our education, of how the research is done, of how the guidelines are written, it's all insidiously influenced by the invisible hand of this gigantic industry. So sure, we spend hours and hours and hours and hours learning about pharmacology for heart disease and virtually zero time on nutrition. And so, of course, we think, well, this is the way that we treat heart disease. This is right. This is good. I learned this at Stanford. But it's part of that is because we're all in this collective slumber about root causes, because there hasn't been an incentive to focus on that. So so much of what I try and educate about a little bit in the book. The book is really a practical guide, but there is some talk about systems issues, is that this business model is not helping us. And this is kind of why we have to take some ownership and responsibility for our foundational health, because there's very few levers right now pushing the system to change, because it's such a good business, and it's unfortunate, but that we have to just be aware.
Sure. No, and I think, to me, what feels important is as a human being in our own lives, we've just got to get curious. And if we start getting really curious, starting with your incredible book, Good Energy, that I love, and then starting with just reading, understanding, listening, learning, then we can start to unpack. I mean, I think at some level, the more curious you get, I mean, once I learned more, I wouldn't eat a McDonald's French fry if, I mean, when you watch and know what these things are made of, no disrespect to McDonald's, but I don't want to eat that, right? Like, the more you know, the more you, I think, have that awareness around what you don't want to put into your body, because you know what it is and what it doesn't do to serve you.
Totally.
Scary.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. And I think once you make that link between your pain points in your own life and how it could be related to the food, and then think about what's happening to children and how that's related, like you said, it starts to become very easy to not want that food that, I was once totally addicted to processed food. I was there, and I was sick. And, I think that it's so funny because, like, you couldn't pay me to eat a McDonald's French fry right now, not because I have a lot of willpower, but because I'm horrified by what's happening to the human capital and the precious, mental health of our country. And so it just seems very unappealing. So I agree with you. I think it's all about a path of curiosity, not about anger, not about fear, but actually about really rooting the health journey in curiosity and joy, and a sense of our, one of the reasons the subtitle of the book is, the connection between metabolism and limitless health, is because I really do believe that every human has limitless potential, literally. And it's a miracle that each of us is here, a statistical near impossibility. And so we gotta get outside and open our eyes and look at a lot of the beauty that's around us in the world, and kind of get back to, I think, seeing that bigger picture of how incredible this opportunity is, and really start from a foundation of awe and moving towards joy. Because I think even though we're talking about some scary things, I think in the conversation, like, fundamentally, like, this is all about moving towards the ability to have the energy to love our lives, show up for people in our community, shine the most light, and reach our highest purpose in this precious time.
Yeah, for sure. No, Casey, the work that you're doing is profound. It is fantastic, and it's so needed. And I think one of the things that I feel like it's important to include is, I think sometimes people who might be listening think, boy, this sounds like a lot of work. This sounds kind of hard. And, I think to your point, it does take a little bit more intention. It does take a little bit of planning. It does take a little bit, maybe more time. But once you get your head inside of it and you can create some systems and some planning, it isn't that complicated, right? And you can deploy this in your life fairly simply and begin to enjoy it and feel so much better. So
totally, it doesn't need to be complicated. I mean, we eat a lot of the same things over and over in our household, and I have the same things in my cart every week. And I think when you learn some really basic strategies about food preparation and actually feel more clear, I think it's the confusion that makes it seem so hard. And it's actually a key point in the book is, like, the system benefits off you thinking it's confusing when it's actually pretty simple and easy.
It's not,
Yeah. So that's a beautiful point, Molly, as well, is that once you kind of get inside of it with that curiosity, it's pretty basic. But it's kind of about getting rid of some of the confusion, so you know why you're doing what you're doing, and reframing it a bit. So I love that.
Yeah, for sure. So, Casey, we end with rapid fire. I'm going to hit you with a couple quick ones.
Great.
What is the first thing you put in your mouth in the morning?
The first thing I put in my mouth in the morning, to be totally honest, is a huge sip of organic coffee with grass-fed milk. I mean, I'm saying, to be honest, because I feel like the thing now is to be like, well, I wait 90 minutes before I drink my coffee and I drink my lemon water with Himalayan sea salt. But I'm like, I wake up every morning and I'm very excited about my coffee. But I do keep it organic, and I love my Alexander Farms A2 grass-fed milk. So yeah.
I love it. I love it. No, that's that. Hey, girl, I'm right there with you. But you know, my daughters are, Mom, you got to drink a big glass of water before you drink your coffee. But
I do drink the water. What eventually.
What is your favorite? Yeah. What is your favorite snack on the go? Oh my gosh,
this is so easy. I go through about an entire bag of Flackers every 3 days because they're such a high fiber source. So what I love is I'm always traveling with a bag of Flackers, and I'll often put a piece of grass-fed cheese on it. I love mixing just a can of wild-caught salmon from Wild Planet with some Primal Kitchen avocado oil mayo and a little bit of sauerkraut. So you're getting your probiotics and your omega-3s, and then putting that on a flax cracker. I probably do that for lunch 3 times a week. I'm also really loving these Paleo Valley or Archer, like 100% grass-fed venison or beef sticks that are just really high quality.
Yeah, those are awesome.
Meat. Yep. So stuff like that for my purse, not the tuna in the purse, but the Flackers. And I really love Nutso butter as well, which is like an organic peanut butter basically, but it has all healthy nuts with high omega-3 content. So that's at Costco, and it's really, really good.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about your favorite dessert?
Ooh, my favorite dessert is I like to melt a little bit of 88% dark chocolate. I like Alter Eco is a nice brand. So it's basically like really dark chocolate, and I melt it on the stovetop for like 2 minutes. I put a tiny bit of coconut oil, just like a teaspoon, and then I drizzle it over any chopped fruit I have, oranges, apples, pears, berries, and then I'll put it in the freezer for like 2 minutes. So the coconut oil makes it solidify like a shell. And we do that for dessert. And then I'll sprinkle some hemp seeds on top. And so it's just, it takes 5 minutes, but it's beautiful and delicious and, doesn't spike my blood sugar.
That's awesome. So the show's called Game Changer. So who or what is a game changer who inspires you and why?
I mean, the first person who jumps into my head for sure is Dr. Mark Hyman. He's someone who I read his book when I was in college. I'm looking at it here on my bookshelf, The Ultramind Solution, which is my first foray into thinking about healthcare differently and root cause approach to the body. And he's a huge inspiration to me. He has been one of the boldest, fiercest leaders in trying to improve our food and healthcare systems. And he's written 19 books at this point, many of which, if not most of which, are New York Times bestsellers. So for anyone who's like really stuck in their health journey, when my book comes out on May 14th, I think that'll be really helpful, but also go buy all of Mark Hyman's books because he's such a fearless leader.
Yeah, and a good guy. Good guy. He was in Atlanta once, and I worked out with him, and that was kind of a cool little deal. And Casey, my guys will cut this in earlier, but Levels, you started a business, Levels. Tell me a little bit about that business and how that can be a resource and why you started that business.
So Levels is a company that helps people gain access to continuous glucose monitoring technology, which is a really cool new type of wearable that actually has a little probe under the skin that's measuring your blood sugar every 5 to 10 minutes, 24 hours a day, and sending that information to your smartphone. So similar to like the Apple Watches and the Auras and Whoops and Fitbits that tell you about heart rate and temperature, this is actually measuring a blood test, basically 24 hours a day. So it's called a bio wearable. And what this does is it gives you closed loop feedback on how everything you're eating and how you're living, how you're exercising, sleeping, is affecting this key metabolic biomarker, blood sugar, in real time. So you can start to understand how to actually work to stabilize your blood sugar, which is super important for health. And so right now we kind of just have no barometer of what's happening with our blood sugar. And in the face of half of Americans having a blood sugar problem, we need better tools. So inspired by what we talked about in the beginning, which was this real desire to help Americans be empowered to improve and understand their metabolic health, there was this real gap where this technology of continuous glucose monitoring was only being given to people once they had type 2 diabetes or if they had type 1 diabetes, but never being given to people earlier in the hopes of helping people kind of learn to eat in a way that would potentially avoid the disease down the road. So me and my co-founders thought, this is crazy. There's this fairly cheap medical device that we're giving to people once they develop disease, but these diseases are largely preventable. So what if we could give it to people much earlier in their journey to understand their diets and really learn how to like create a diet and lifestyle plan that keeps blood sugar a bit more stable? Because when we get off, the average American is on a glucose roller coaster. We eat, you know, the Pop-Tart or the oatmeal or the croissant or the toast or the orange juice for breakfast, and our blood sugar spikes and then crashes, and then we're hungry and tired. So then we eat the sandwich with the bread and the chips and the French fries and all the carbs for lunch, and then we spike again, and then we crash and we're tired, and then we need the Frappuccino to wake us up. And then, you know, it's just this constant treadmill of spikes and crashes. And what's so cool is you find when you wear this, like, oh my God, I just need to like, if I can like add some more fiber or protein or fat to this particular food, I can stabilize my glucose. If I walk for 10 minutes after a meal, my glucose is much more stable. If I get a good night's sleep, my glucose is more stable. Oh, my blood sugar is spiking when I'm stressed out. Maybe I need to take a few deep breaths. So it's a real incredible holistic barometer for a lot of these lifestyle choices that can seem so nebulous right now. And it's been incredible to see. We've had 60,000 plus people go through the program and have seen some really life-changing things and really cut through a lot of years of confusion very quickly. So it's
It's a terrific product. I actually was introduced to it about a year ago. I think it is fantastic. And so is your book, Casey. I mean, at the end of the day, it is about us owning our health journey, us educating ourselves, us being curious, and us being proactive. And thank you so much for the work that you do and for making the people in this world have an opportunity to make better choices and be healthier.
Well, right back at you. Thank you so much, Molly, for giving me the opportunity to be here. It's wonderful to meet you, and I'm just really admire your work and your platform. Thank you.
Casey, awesome. Boy, I hope that uploads like you said. I don't know. It was super odd. I'm sure we're fine.
Yes. I think we will be okay.
It's showing that it is, so we're good. But, I apologize for some random
again.
pauses there because that was...
Oh, no. Are you there?
Yeah, no, I'm here. I said I apologize for some of those random pauses, but I think we got... I mean, I'm watching it. It's uploading. We're good.
I think it should be fine. I'm telling you, I would say 50% of our episodes, the Levels podcast,